You might remember in my review for The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson that I would be reading some Raymond Feist next to continue my exploration of fantasy novels. So today I will be talking about Magician Apprentice, the first in Raymond Feist's Rift War saga, a trilogy of novels from the 80s which connect into his larger series of fantasy novels in the Rift War cycle, of which I think that there are about 30. A buddy of mine recommended this series and I really wanted to Sanderson pill him, so I thought I would make a trade-off to better butter up the deal. He happened to finish Way of Kings faster than I finished this book. This is about half the length of that novel. So that should either indicate to you what a great time my buddy had reading Way of Kings, or it should be an indication that Magician Apprentice was a bit of a slow read for me by comparison. Before I really dive into the review, I do want to mention that my coworker happens to make bookmarks for the library every month. The theme for this month was a little wizard guy. So using this to read some Feist, I think, was pretty appropriate. It's really cool working with cool people who are talented and get to use their talents for cool things. Magician Apprentice is set in the land of Midcamia, focused primarily in the town of Crydee. We follow the main character, Pug, from his youth, a kid who isn't particularly good at anything, doesn't fit into any given role in the village. He's taken in by the magician Colgan. In this world, magicians are seen as a little troublesome or different or strange. We see years go by and Pug developing as a magician's apprentice. Then one day he and his friend Thomas encounter a ship from another world, a harbinger of doom that spells war for the whole realm of Midcamia. And so Pug and Thomas leave their peaceful village to try to get word to the king and warn the other nations of this world that war is coming from the Surani, people that have traveled to Midcamia through these portals where the title Rift War gets its name from. So it's a pretty rip-roaring yarn of fantasy, one that I found really dull for about 60%, and then all of a sudden it decides it's going to be a completely different book, focus on all of the other characters in the story except for Pug, much to my surprise, pleasant surprise. Now I know that Magician Apprentice is only the first half of a larger book called Magician. It is only split into 2 volumes in the United States. In the UK you get the entire first third of the Rift War saga in one book. But I think having approached this as just one book, it was interesting. I think that it ended up being more interesting than maybe if I had the full picture. The main character, Pug, I felt was very bland and did not suit this kind of story really well. He's not really a very complex character. I mean, it's hard to dislike Pug. He stumbles upon his magic powers at just the right moment and impresses the princess, who falls for him. He gets into scraps with other boys in the yard and plays around with his friend Thomas, and oh, aren't they such a mirthful pair, the both of them. The humor in this novel is so flat. It is so predictable that it almost bordered on like being a parody of itself. Pug also suffered as a protagonist because he's active, but he's not so active that he drives the plot forward. He really feels like a character that is being strung along by a conflict that has nothing to do with him and that is out of his control. The machinations of this story are well beyond Pug. I think that it was also a bit of a misnomer, this book being called Magician Apprentice. It implies that Pug is going to be the center focus of the novel. He's really just the character we experience a lot of the early elements through. It felt very Tolkien light, where the world of man has to reach out to the elves and the dwarves in order to come together to fight some other looming threat. There's a chase scene through the forest. There's a chase scene through a mine where they encounter a red-eyed, malevolent force that causes one of the characters to get split off from the rest of the group. It felt so much like Lord of the Rings, it's not even funny. And then something really weird happened. We get chapters that follow characters who are not Pug, and a lot of these characters are a lot more interesting than Pug. It feels like they could actually be in danger because Pug feels, you know, impervious given his role as the main character. The scene where Pug's friend, Thomas, he's the one who gets split off from everybody in the mine, he's getting chased by a wraith through the darkness. It's actually rather perilous. He finds just the right solution at the right time to save his hide and make it out alive, but from that point on, they are separated and never reconvene. Thomas ends up having his own arc. When he dons this golden armor, which he finds in the mine, there's like this echo of the suit's past wearer, who is like this warlord, and so his personality is imprinting on Thomas and turning him into something else. There are a couple of elements in the story that have symmetry to the Way of Kings. How Thomas has these visions, so does Dalinar, a king who is incompetent and had to inherit the throne rather young, and he's afraid of being assassinated. And then, surprisingly, Pug is enslaved. The main character of both of these books are slaves. We don't hear from Pug again after that. To our knowledge, he could just be dead. I also think that was where Feist's prose improved. I don't know, maybe this was just the actual story improving. You get chapters following Thomas, you get chapters following the son of the Duke, Arutha. He takes on a very critical position of leadership back in Cry-D while the war across Midkemia is being fought. And it's a very dire situation in Cry-D. There's this very satisfying destruction of the homeworld that feels tragic. Up to that point, there hadn't been any real sense of loss or consequence. The home village getting razed, and Thomas, this youthful kid, changing in personality, kind of against his will. You finally get that sense that things actually matter, which I didn't get for the longest time. Not only do things have a greater sense of weight to them, a sense of stakes, but we get new characters introduced in the second half who break a little further from the archetypal mold. There's an interesting character who is introduced who is a Surani defect, assimilating into the Cry-D army. Through this character, you get more information about the opposing army, who up to this point have felt almost just like this essentialist, sort of vague, bad army. Like, they are just the bad guys. But as soon as we have this other character enter the fray, we understand a lot more about their culture and how honor bears a great weight. We also see how that even impacts their approach to warfare. Cry-D is under siege. There's this onslaught of Surani who just keep attacking the castle for like weeks. The Surani are at a huge disadvantage, though. They have no way of getting over the wall, and their men just keep getting picked off one by one. But they keep going, willingly dying for the greater cause of their army. They are kind of within range of the archers from the tower, and one of the Surani leaders stands within the firing range. It is understood that this is actually something of like a ritual of theirs. He's willingly putting himself into harm's way and is being bold, and it would be dishonorable if the men on the tower shot him down with arrows. It's kind of this game of chicken. Like, are you gonna kill me just so that you can wipe me out, or are you gonna stick to your honor? And there's a clever little subversion of that where they take a fowling arrow, which is just meant for knocking out birds, and they shoot this guy, so they don't kill him, but they pelt him in the stomach so hard he bends over and vomits, which I thought was a really clever solution to that sort of challenge from the Surani. So you start to get, slowly, more unique scenarios playing out over time. Even though the early beats don't have much symmetry to where I've been left off at with this novel, they have something of a bittersweet tinge in retrospect, given how the war has developed, how characters have changed, how people have had to mature due to the circumstances of war. Is that to say that all of this buildup, this very linear structure of the early chapters, was necessary? I don't think so. I think that the pacing also improves in the second half. More years elapse per chapter. This novel really could have improved by having that concise, condensed narrative structure in the first half, so as to have the same rhythm of progression that the latter half does. And again, this is all just in the scope of the first half of a bigger book. So when I review Magician Master, I will probably have more thoughts about how the complete vision of the story works. As far as writing style goes, it didn't strike me as particularly distinct. There were some moments where it felt a little bit stiff. The comedic situations felt so ordinary. Actually, given how grave the situation is, it almost felt inappropriate later on in the book, though you could argue that there's a bit of gallows humor in the second half, which gives it a slight edge. Pretty predictable throughout the whole novel is how the love triangle was playing out. I just knew that she was going to end up with the other guy, and Pug was going to get separated from her for a long time. I didn't know he was going to be enslaved and just disappear from the story. It didn't surprise me when she ended up developing feelings for the other guy, and Pug got cucked. But I think there's a more mature statement in having her end up with Roland as the other guy's name. Pug just felt like he was navigating this situation way too smoothly early on. The princess presents herself to him. Pug just very rationally in the moment is like, no, you have to go away. I have my studies. I have so much more in my life. I'm so confused. I can't do this right now. He felt way too keen an operator to talk himself out of that situation the way he did. Not that he needs to give into his lusts and we need a scene like that or anything, but he felt way too mature for his age. Roland served a good romantic rival to Pug. He didn't really function well as a childhood friend character. There's a rushed sequence where they both get drunk together after fighting over Carlene, and it's like the day before Pug has to leave. You're supposed to get the impression that Roland and Pug are great buddies who are just romantic rivals, but they care about each other. And I think it would have been a lot better if Roland had been introduced that way earlier into the story and spent more time as Pug's friend and not just his bitter rival. An aspect of the book that was consistently strong once it started to appear and then take over the main focus of the story were the action sequences. The Siege of Cryde is very exciting, but you also have a great sequence where we follow Arutha for an extended period of time. Again, not having gotten very much of this character prior, where he's trying to get up to the top of this lighthouse to warn the town that these marauders are coming in. The setting is very harrowing because it's in the middle of this lightning storm and it's really dark out. Arutha trying to circumvent these forces and alert the town, and then coming back from that after sustaining an injury, trying to save some more people. It was pretty exciting to read. Probably the strongest aspect of this book. So if you're looking for some fantasy that is heavy on action, I wouldn't recommend this immediately, but if you can invest yourself enough through the first stretch, I think that the latter half will reward you kindly. I would have preferred had some of the characters that we'd gotten to know actually perished in some of these battles. I do remember in Way of Kings, there were some bridgemen that we got accustomed to who didn't make it to the end of that book, and it felt like anyone really could die. That the characters that are getting development aren't just getting development because, you know, they're intended to live through bigger events. That any of the characters could have perished, I think, was a really exciting element to Way of Kings, and that really isn't here. I get the sense that the cast is going to stick around. My prediction in the Way of Kings review was correct. It did not stack up to that novel, but it did give me a nice flavor of fantasy to chew through over the past couple of weeks while I've been donating plasma. Nothing exciting enough to, you know, get me to redline, but I don't really have much else to say about this book, except that in the mining sequence there were references to glory holes, which was kind of funny. Man, this review sucks. Sorry. Alright, that's all I got. See ya.